Hello everyone, thank you for joining us. Today we are joined by Elaine Halligan, who is the director of the parenting practice. She's also an author, coach and public speaker. Thank you, Elaine, for joining us today. Elaine specialises in parenting and teaching people the skills of parenting, and especially those who are separating. So it's really great that we have Elaine here to kind of part her wisdom. Elaine, it'd be lovely to understand just how you got into this work, because I know that you're very thought of throughout the industry. It'd be wonderful just to hear your kind of story and how you came to doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, happy to do so. Yeah, my story is quite a shocking one. And I guess I have to start by just saying that as a parent of two young adult children now, and I have to pinch myself, Nicole, when I say this, 26 and 22. I have to confess that, thank you. But I have to confess, when I first started being a parent, I felt completely overwhelmed. I felt exhausted. And I felt that it was one of the hardest jobs I'd ever done. And I was completely taken by shock. And I did all the things that just didn't bring out the best in my children. And I don't know whether you recognize this, but I nagged my children.
Yeah.
I repeated instructions.
Yeah.
I reminded. What else did I do? I cajoled.
Yes.
I bribed.
Yeah, definitely done that one.
I definitely threatened.
Yeah.
And actually, there were moments where I ended up just screaming like a banshee. And I just didn't recognize myself. And I had no idea why I was finding parenting my little boy, Sam, so challenging. And to roll the story forward, what happened was, and it is quite shocking this, by the age of 7, my little beautiful blonde, blue-eyed boy had been excluded from 3 schools in so many years. So as a family, all those years ago, we were completely in crisis. I didn't understand his behavior. And I started to recognize that I had on my hands what's called an orchid child, as opposed to a dandelion child.
Right.
I don't know whether you've heard that research from Professor Boyce. It's fascinating. It just says, look, everything's about understanding your children's temperament and character. And dandelion children are robust, resilient. They just get on with it. It sounds to me as if you have a dandelion child or 2, and they're just kind of easy to get on with, and they kind of bounce back and they're resilient. And that's nature. But some of us have children who are more sensitive, and they're the orchid children. And once I started to understand that my son actually had a temperament that was very sensitive, and people misunderstood that, but hugely intense and impulsive. And he got into so much trouble at school. And everyone just labeled him as naughty, stupid, and silly. And yeah, I just sensed there was something else going on. And what we discovered was that he had some specific learning issues, which were undiagnosed for quite some time, and also neurological conditions. So we ended up discovering that Sam had dyslexia severely, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And then he started being labeled with other things such as ODD. I don't know whether you know what that is.
No.
It's oppositional defiance disorder.
Okay.
And then finally, when I got diagnosis of PDA, which is not public displays of affection, I should say, pathological demand avoidance, which is a subset of autistic spectrum condition, I just came home and I cried.
I'm not surprised.
And I just looked at my little boy, and I looked at him as if he was a rock covered in mud, and everyone had just thrown these labels at him, and they'd labeled him, and they'd literally written him off in society age 7. So I gave up my career, and I just thought, no, I don't believe this. I believe that my son is not being a problem. I believe he's having a problem. And my job, together with my husband, is to work out what that problem is. And once we understood what his learning needs were, I then started to train as a behavioral specialist and a parenting coach, because we then realized what he needed from us. And more than anything, he needed positive affirmation. We needed to bring up his self-esteem. More than anything, he needed us to validate his feelings and emotions, because at age 7, he felt like a complete failure, written off in society, and his self-esteem was on the floor. Yeah. And the story is, which I ended up writing in my book, actually, I don't know whether you can see it there, My Child's Different. I'll just get it for you. This is the book I wrote in 2018 called My Child's Different. And in this story, I write about parenting Sam, and I actually get Sam's voice in there and I interview him.
Oh, wow.
And it's also the voice of my parenting coach, who is my former business partner, Melissa. So it's a wonderful book with 3 different voices coming through. And he tells a story of what it was like as a child, being written off, being told he was stupid and silly. And the story is that he finishes school aged 18 as head boy. He discovers he's a bit of a leader. He discovers that despite all his learning difficulties, he's got an above average IQ and is highly intelligent. And he's gone on now to be a budding entrepreneur. So my story is about kind of giving hope and optimism to parents who may be feeling very challenged. Yeah. And I think all parents over the last 2 years have felt hugely challenged. And what's interesting is that with parents having done homeschooling, they're now looking at their children with quite a different lens. And maybe they're observing things about the behavior that they may never have observed before. Mm-hmm. And what we're finding is that parents are understanding more than ever now just how important it is to spend time and energy on knowing that positive parenting piece, knowing how to bring out the best in the child you've got, not the child you may want them to be.
Yeah.
And so I think my story gives lots of hope and optimism to parents in all sorts of situations. So I love dealing with parents with challenging children, who we call neurodiverse. But the reality is the other set of families who do find parenting challenging is the separating families. So I kind of just fell into picking up many more separating families who wanted coaching in the co-parenting piece. And what I help them do, if there's good communication between mum and dad or between 2 parents, what I help them do is just find their way to co-parenting so that we always put the children first. Yeah. And that's my story. So hopefully I've summarized that quickly enough.
Excellent. Yes, no, thank you very much for that. And it's brilliant to hear that you've got that level of experience, that first-hand experience with Sam of absolutely walking the walk and going above and beyond to find out how, what he needed.
There's nothing that shocks me. No story from a parent will shock me, because I've kind of experienced most things, and we've come through the other side, and we've come through the other side because if every child has at least one caring adult in their lives who's able to parent in a positive way, and when I say positively, this is not a wishy-washy way of parenting. Mm-hmm. The principles are, it's about being positive, sure. It's also about being firm with your boundaries and rules, but being consistent. Yeah. And that is the issue for separating families. Often it's the lack of consistency and how you explain that to the children and how you cope with that on a day-to-day basis. Because if one parent is doing one thing in one home and another parent is doing another thing in another home, how does that impact the children? It causes confusion, and actually it doesn't help us train them into good habits and behaviors that we want for life.
No, and it's so interesting actually, because a lot of the stuff that I do, obviously I work with the parents, not the children, and it's about their relationship that enables them to have that family.
But the parent relationship, not the parent-child.
The parent-child relationship. Right. But it's so interesting because a lot of the issues that I find that people have in their divorce, their separation, their marriage, and any new relationships that they're going to have going forward, and it impacts the way they parent as well, often stems back from their own childhood and their own stuff that they've kind of brought into that relationship and their subconscious mind that's been kind of programmed over the years of their
completely.
And, the amount of times I see patterns just reoccurring in the next generation, and that's why there's an opportunity, I think, when you do separate, to get the right support from the likes of you or I, to stop that kind of pattern appearing in the next generation and having the same impact.
You have to have awareness though, and you have to want to change it, and you have to be aware of the impact on your children. And what I say is that parenting is not instinctive, because in the early days, I've been doing this work for over 12 years, and in the early days I would be met with quite a lot of resistance from people, which is parenting skills. Well, isn't it the most instinctive job you'll ever do? And I say, actually, there's no instinct to parenting at all. There's no instinct. It's a deeply ingrained state based on your experiences. Yeah. And if you were fortunate enough to have had a good upbringing, then yeah, you're lucky and you may just replicate what your parents did with you. But if your upbringing wasn't so good, and there was, some distresses there, and there was maybe an authoritarian way of parenting using punitive measures, the chances are you'll replicate that unless you actively make a decision to do something different. So I think we're at a cusp of a real breakthrough here. Like your NCT classes 20, 30 years ago, people may not have accepted them. Now they are hugely acceptable. And I think on the parenting piece, we need to make positive parenting classes and support just open for all parents. And it should be as acceptable as doing your antenatal and postnatal class. And I think things are changing. And I think COVID has got a lot to contribute to that change.
Yeah, I'd agree with you actually. And I think it's similarly with getting sort of the right emotional support when you're going through a really stressful time as well. I think there's been a lot more talk around mental health and looking after your mindset and, taking care of yourself through COVID. That's actually opened up coaching much wider than it perhaps did before, where it's kind of more associated with corporate and development and that kind of thing within your career, and actually people are seeing it more as something that they need and they're personalizing their for their own emotional well-being. And similarly, yeah, as you say with the parenting piece as well, because I completely agree with you, and I think every parent should do.
I really wish it was mandatory. And I should say I work kind of differently from a coach. I'm solution focused. I have all the practical, pragmatic tips and strategies. So kind of unlike a coach, although obviously I'm going to support my clients to find their own solutions, actually with their permission, if they want it, I have the solutions. Yeah. So they tell me the hotspot areas in their family, and I have a whole toolkit of skills that I deliver that they can go away and try and give a go. And I don't think there's anything more important just now than supporting this generation of children to enter into adulthood feeling competent, feeling confident, feeling that they can make a success of life however we define success. And I think the spotlight now is not so much, should not be so much on the mental health crisis in terms of what do we do when children get to a mental health crisis. It's what can we do to prevent it? Yeah. What can we do now to give parents all the skills so that they are aware of the signs, so that everything about home life is about relationship quality. And if we can get that right, the chances are going to be lessened for our children falling into mental health issues.
100%. Preventive is so much better than cure, isn't it?
It's so much what?
It's so much better than cure. It's you're getting on the front foot rather than trying to catch up. So
exactly.
100%. So I know you've mentioned the fact that obviously COVID has had an impact. Have you seen any other kind of trends or things that are happening around separating parents that you're coming across quite often at the moment? Or
that's an interesting question. I think there's two things I'm seeing. I'm definitely seeing more high conflict divorce. Now that may be due to the kind of parents I'm attracting. I'm not sure, but there's definitely much more high conflict. And the second thing I think I'm noticing, and I've not got any empirical research on this, but it's just my anecdotal evidence, is that there's many more divorces and kind of later on in marriages where there is some personality disorder of one parent being diagnosed.
Okay.
So maybe, an autistic spectrum condition that's always been there, but never been diagnosed, or some sort of neurological condition like ADHD. And often I find one partner hasn't quite been believed. So I know the term narcissistic personality disorder is absolutely bandied around, but my anecdotal evidence is that, I'm seeing many more families where actually there may be a personality disorder. And I know that's a huge sweeping generalization, but that's just the trend I'm seeing.
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely seeing, as you mentioned, kind of older parents divorcing. And it's interesting because I always get asked, like, is it easier if the children are smaller? And I'm sorry, if the children are older and can understand it more, but just based then again on my personal experience, I don't think it makes it any easier, regardless of the age of the child. I think when two parents are divorcing, it's still difficult on the child if it's not managed you know, in the right way, and older children are just as you know, struggle just as much and find it just as difficult as younger children. In fact, sometimes more so, because I think in my experience, parents tend to try and involve them or speak to them more about the divorce and what's going on, more so than they would if they were younger, and actually that can create more problems. And so I'd actually argue it could potentially even be harder if your children are older in the experience.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I would say there's two age groups who are very impacted, and they are the babies and actually the teenagers.
Yeah.
And, you know, when your baby's born, and you've just had a new birth, so congratulations on that. When your baby's born, you know, you need to be your baby's world.
Yeah.
They can't communicate any other way other than kind of crying if they're in distress. And if you're going through a divorce or a separation and you're unable to meet your baby's needs, that has a big impact on attachment. So what we find, and this is a real shock for many parents, is that it's actually the babies who suffer quite a lot in those first 2 years if the attachment's not made. Mm-hmm. And then clearly the teenagers. The teenagers, because of all their hormonal, not just hormonal development, but brain development too, are anyway at an egocentric stage of development. And that's often when families see a complete kind of breakdown in communication, where they grunt, they're spending too much time in their rooms, there's not clear rules on technology, and suddenly before you know it, your teenager's not communicating to you. Add on a child of divorce to that who's a teenager, and then you've got a really complex melting pot of issues. So I would say all children are affected, but actually all children are affected to different extent, depending on two things, depending on their temperament and how they cope with change, but also depending on how mum and dad cope, how mum and dad are able to manage that period. And the mantra is that always try and put your children first. Yeah. That is almost impossible to do if you yourself are overwhelmed with the, I'm going to say emotional turmoil, but, you know, if you're still in the early stages of the grief cycle, because I believe when a relationship ends that children and adults go through a grief cycle. Yeah. And that grief cycle is not cyclical. It can move around. It's not static. Yeah. And it can take years to finally get through that grief cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not one size fits all. There's not a time box process if you go through the stage and then the next stage and it lasts this long. Yeah, no, everyone's different. Completely agree with you. So speaking about that kind of parenting after parting, I know you've just recently done a course with Flip.
Just about to launch it. Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about that and what's
Sure, yeah. So Flip are a London law firm called Family Law in Partnership, and together we are putting back on the course called Parenting After Parting, which has been going for many years, IRL, in real life. And when COVID struck, you know, we had to pivot and turn all the courses online, and it's just taken a little bit of time to kind of get everything together. But finally, the Parenting After Parting course is launching just next month. It starts in February, and it's just a wonderful, simple, because what I know in my parenting work is parents at this stage are overwhelmed. They can't commit to too much learning. You know, it's really challenging for them. So we've developed a kind of really quick, I'm going to say, 3-module course that's divided into kind of 6 pre-recorded videos, which parents can go online and listen to. And then we come together for 3 evenings. I think it's Wednesday nights in February. And we do a live group. Oops, sorry about that. That's my dog. That's my dog making a huge appearance. Hey? Oh. And he is high energy. Okay, let's hope he calms down. It's real life, this, isn't it? I wonder who's going to come in next.
Yeah, well, don't worry. I did one of these a little while ago, and my little boy came in and joined the call.
Oh my gosh, that reminds me of the American Professor? Yeah. and his wife with the baby behind him.
Come out of the room. People don't worry about that anymore. That's the other thing COVID's done for us. I think home life and work life have merged. People are a lot more relaxed about the fact that you get those kind of interruptions. But it's as you say.
Now Brodie's interrupted me so much. I've lost my train of thought. Where was I?
So you were saying that it's there's 3 evenings over February.
Oh yes, yeah. So 3 evenings. I think it's 8 till 9 p.m. We come together in a group. And what I do is I don't teach. So the teaching is done online. You can do all the teaching, you can do all the learning online. And in that session on the Wednesday evening, we're joined with a representative from Flip, the solicitor, and we will do group life coaching. So, you know, we'll do it in order of the syllabus. And the first part of the syllabus is just, where are you now? How are you feeling? How are you managing your emotions? What's going on for you? And we talk about the grief cycle.
Yeah.
The second stage, which parents absolutely love, is about, you know, how can you support your your children? How are you going to talk to your children about the divorce? How are you going to do it physically, practically? When? Are you going to do it on a school day? Is it going to be a weekend? You know, what to expect? How are you going to respond to how your children are feeling? And I deliver a really powerful skill called being an emotion coach, which is about validating feelings. And that is really difficult for parents to do, especially separating parents, because we all want to put a sticky plaster over it and reassure our children everything will be fine, don't worry about it. And that doesn't help. So parents are absolutely blown away when they learn about emotion coaching, because the normal response we give of giving advice or reassuring or questioning or kind of denying or dismissing the feeling, you know, I don't want daddy to leave, or I don't want to go to daddy's house, or I don't want to go to mummy's house. And we end up saying, it'll be all fine. You'll have a wonderful time when you get there, and don't worry about it. None of those things work, because we're just saying, actually, your feelings don't matter. So I teach parents how to validate children's feelings. And what's fabulous is that when you validate feelings, you are developing a child who's got emotional intelligence. And if a child has emotional intelligence, it means they're able to recognize, respond, and respect their own emotions, as well as other people's. And what's fascinating is all the research, both empirical and anecdotal, says that children are more resilient as a result of it. So the second part of the course, you know, touches on some of the parenting skills I teach, but obviously we're just touching on it, but it gives a glimpse. And then in the third sessions, we kind of look about some of the legal processes, what you can expect. That's where it's really helpful to have a representative from the legal team, although they cannot give legal advice. And then we look finally at the end of the course to moving forward, because it is about having hope and optimism and imagining a different world. But you can only do that once you know that your children are cared for, that you've got some form of communication between the other parent, and you know how to help your children through whatever they're experiencing. So the essence is that children don't need to just survive this period. They can thrive. They can absolutely thrive in a two-home family. It just depends on how both parents set it up.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. And actually, you know, what comes after that is, you know, usually an extended or blended family, and that's, you know, only a good thing if you've got the right foundations in place around that family, which is my experience. You know, I have a lovely blended family now. It was a really rocky road to get in there, because unfortunately my parents didn't do your course and didn't handle their divorce particularly well, and it wasn't easy growing up. But then, you know, it got to a certain point where we were old enough. I was the youngest, and once I'd kind of got to a certain age, mum and dad got on fine. And actually now, as a blended family, we all get on brilliantly. And, you know, I can organise things which my stepmom and my mum will be at, and, you know, and my dad's first wife, and it's lovely, and we all get together and there's no issues whatsoever. And I wouldn't have it any other way. And I've never once, I did an interview with one of my half sisters actually, and we both said, like, did you ever want mum and dad, your mum and dad, or my mum and dad to get back together? And we were like, no, because then we wouldn't have all of this.
Because they were happier apart. They were happier apart.
Yeah, exactly. And my parents divorced when I was 2, and even from that, I've never wanted mum and dad to be together. And you know, even speaking to her mums, we share a dad, we have different mums. Even speaking to her mum recently at a birthday party, and she said, you know, I wouldn't want to stay married to your dad either, because then, you know, my children wouldn't have you as their siblings, and, you know, all the nieces and nephews and everything. And
so it's a huge extended family.
Yeah, and we love it.
That must be, you know, as a coach in the work you're doing, how wonderful is it that you've got the experience? You are a child of a divorced family, and you've had success in a blended family, and you've got bonus mums, bonus dads, and bonus siblings now. I know you referred to step and half. I tend to refer to them as bonus. It's just another term, but it's lovely. What a lovely story. That must make you such a compassionate, empathetic coach.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, and you know, we never, I refer to them as that in this context, just so you can understand the complexity of it, but we would never say, this is my half sister, this is my stepsister, this is my full, like, we are all sisters, we're all brothers. Nice. And even my sister's mum was saying, I never refer to you as anything but her sister, even though you're not my child. I will always refer to you as
I'm fascinated to know, do you think that was luck, it turned out so well, or do you think your mother and father did something to, you know, ensure that this was the outcome?
That's a really good question.
I'm interviewing you now. I'll stop this, Elaine. Stop it.
No. I think there was so much pain between the two of them. There was infidelity involved in the breakdown of my mum and dad's marriage. And I think there was a lot of pain, a lot of anger between the two of them. But I can honestly say they both really cared about us and tried to do best by us. And I never felt unloved or unappreciated, that my feelings didn't count, you know, to what you were saying a moment ago, that I never had that from either parent. I never felt like I wasn't good enough or I didn't have their support. So even though they couldn't stand one another, I never felt that impacted my relationship with either parent. And I'm really fortunate to have really loving siblings as well, and being the youngest, I've kind of I suppose had them as well kind of looking after me growing up also, which I've really benefited from. And the relationships that they've established since, so particularly my dad with my stepmom, that was such a brilliant relationship, and I could see how that would work versus the relationship he had with my mum or with his previous wife, why those relationships work. And I was actually thinking about this the other day. I was talking to my sisters about it and said, you know, what is it about our stepmom that you think that made it work? Because she never got involved in any of the issues. She never said anything about either of the previous wives. She's always been there, and we absolutely adore her. And sadly, my dad's not here anymore, but we all have such a great relationship with my stepmom, and she's very much part of our family, you know, as she would be if my dad were still here.
Such a lovely story.
She's done, you know, really well, I think, in just holding us all together as well. So
that's such a lovely story. So how did we digress onto that?
Apologies. So you're saying about Flip and the course. So that's available from February, did you say?
So it's available from now. You can sign up anytime and start the e-learning modules. And then the actual group live coaching, which is only over 3 Wednesday nights. That's all we ask people to commit to, because that's probably all they can commit to at the moment. And that starts, I think, February the 23rd, and that's for 3 weeks. So it's all on the website, and I'm sure you'll send a link. It's at theparentpractice.com.
Yes. In the members area, I will share all your details, as well as links to the parenting after parting course, but also your website as well. So any other courses that people are interested in, doesn't have to just be that particular course. If there are any others, because I know that you've got a wealth of material and courses and help.
I've developed a lot. I think the last 12 months, I've had such fun. It's been because everything IRL has gone. We used to do live courses throughout London. It's now all URL, and I've developed loads of wonderful courses that are really accessible. You know, 5 minutes a day. The 30-day positive parenting program is a real winner. It's just a little 5-minute video every day that gives you the whole kind of toolkit of positive parenting skills.
And as you say, it's so important because it pays dividends to who they're going to grow up to be in the future, and what parents they're going to be. And as you say, we learn from our own. So that you know, it's such an investment, as you say, it's a small investment really for the reward and the importance of it. So is there any kind of top tips or anything that you would you'd want people to come away with today, in the sense of how you do that? I know it's a huge topic and not something that we can cover in today's session, but if there was one piece of advice that you could part with today that would really help people on how to do that kind of positive parenting when you're separating, what would it be?
Such a hard question. because
there's so much.
Well, and it also depends on the type of relationship between two parents. You know, if we're in a good position and the two parents are communicating well, my message is always put the children's interests first. And I think my top tip, even if you're not communicating well, is to create a co-parenting plan. And I've got on my website a sample under my freebies of a co-parenting plan, where you can kind of divorce a lot of the emotions and kind of use what I call a third point. So a third point is a piece of paper where you can look at and just go through this parenting plan individually and work out what it is that you would like for your child. Just design your ideal family life with your child in your home, and then come together as parents and just see what areas you agree with. And what's amazing, even in the high conflict divorce cases, I find at least 80% of those areas they're in agreement with, actually. And what happens is we have a negativity bias in our brain. We just focus on that 20% that we don't agree with. But by doing that co-parenting plan, what it does very cleverly is help parents see actually that there's more in common than they realize in terms of their values and their principles in bringing up their children. And from that basis, you can go forward looking at how to solve the 20%. So my top tip would be separate emotions. And I know that's almost impossible. You need to do all the work on yourself first. Keep things really kind of brief. Keep things in terms of communication between parents, keep it clear, keep it concise. But that co-parenting plan, I think, is a great tool just to see how much you actually do agree on. And then we can get to work on the stuff that's more contentious. But that negativity bias means that we often ignore the 80% that we're in agreement on. Sorry, that wasn't a very articulate answer.
No, it was. That's really, really helpful, because I think you're completely right. The negativity bias is where people then end up in court because they're so focused on the stuff that they can't agree on. And we actually had Sam Wooden from the divorce surgery, who's a barrister, on a few weeks back, and she was saying, as a barrister, she would highly recommend never ending up in court, and that's the worst place that families can end up. And judges would agree, you're not gonna get to a good outcome going that route. And all of this
completely. Oh, it's the definition of insanity. And Flip will do everything possible to keep their clients out of court. And the thing that people don't realize is that the legal process does not deal with the emotional breakdown. There are no emotions involved. So if you're wanting kind of fairness or a kind of forum to be heard, if you want your story to be heard, the legal process is not the place to do it. So I completely agree with Sam. We should do everything possible to keep clients out of court. And honestly, it's the definition of insanity, some of the figures that are being spent.
Yeah, well, this is it. And the thing is, once you've been to court, you can end up with a parenting coordinator who will come up with that plan. But actually, if you can do what you're suggesting, which is, come do it and then come together and look at that 80%, then I'd rather than focus on the 20%.
Why would you have a stranger coming up with working out how your children are going to spend their time between you? Honestly, it's the definition of insanity. And this is where parents really need to kind of use what I call their prefrontal cortex, their thinking brain, their executive functioning. But obviously, going through divorce, what ends up happening is they're in their amygdala, which is their hot brain. And if you can't get out of your amygdala, you will not make sensible decisions. And it's so toxic, and the pain of that and the impact of that can last for years.
And I've seen it, and it does, and not just years, it can last generations as well, because as you say,
you're right,
so it will then just pass on to the children, the environment they grew up in. They will then parent in a very similar way, unless they take the time to do the work that you should have done in the first place. And the damage is it can be untold. So that's so helpful. Thank you so much, Elaine. It's been brilliant talking to you today. And I know that we've only just scratched the surface on this topic, but I know you've got so much more to offer if you go to your website, which I will share.
Thank you.
I think we've actually already shared the your sample of the parenting plan, but I'll share that as well again with the members. Thank you so much for your time today, and we'll hopefully speak to you again.
It's a pleasure, and just thank you for all the work you're doing, because this is a jigsaw puzzle. This is a jigsaw puzzle. You know, as a separating family or parent, you'll need someone advising you legally. You may need a financial advisor. You may need some sort of therapist in order to work through the grief cycle. And where I slot in is providing the positive parenting piece, giving the practical, pragmatic strategies for what to do and say when your child's sad or they're upset or they're refusing to go to the other parent's house. So I think I'm much more than a coach. I'm definitely not a therapist. I need to make that clear. Everything is solution focused. Thanks for having me. I've loved our chat, Nicole.
No problem at all. Thank you so much for coming on.
Take care. Bye for now.
Bye.